Well, hello, good evening, and welcome to episode 83 of not Fracking Nightmare. That's not for another hour and a half. It's Humanity versus Insanity. And as you can see, I've got Brian Gerrish with me in the studio. Thanks for coming in, Brian.
A pleasure.
Brian has offered to take over if my voice finally completely craps out on me, but we'll see how that runs.
Yeah, okay. I'm sure you'll be fine.
In addition, we have a remarkable guest tonight. And no more remarkable than it happens to be on the eve of the US presidential election. And my working title for tonight's show was The Last Day of Sanity? ? Because depending on what happens tomorrow, we may be living in a world that takes on a whole nother dimension. But my guest tonight, this picture here on screen, has a very, very significant relevance to my guest, but she'll come on to that just a little bit later. Of course, we're coming up to November 22nd, the anniversary of the Kennedy assassination. But like I said, there's a bit of backstory before we actually get to that. And it's my great pleasure to welcome Judyth Vary Baker from the United States. So Judyth, thank you very much for joining us this evening.
Happy to be here. Thank you.
Well, you know, it's one of those sort of synchronicities that up until about 3 weeks ago, I must confess that your name hadn't crossed my, horizons. And then not only do, we have you as the guest on Humanity versus Insanity, but I discover we're actually speaking at the same event in Ireland in February. So it's
the Open Mind Conference.
Indeed. So it's an absolute pleasure to have the opportunity to speak to you before that. Now, Judyth, you were actually something of not just something, you were a very significant child protege, and particularly in the areas of physics and chemistry. And I believe that at 16, you actually invented a new process for getting magnesium out of seawater. And this, yes, of course, was all prior to November 63. So, give us a little bit of background as to your sort of mid to late teen years, and then what it was that actually got you to the point where November 22nd, 63 played such a significant part in your life.
Well, early on, I was always interested in science. My father was a genius who invented a number of components for television, which he obtained so many royalties that he retired to Florida. So we ended up in Florida. And I built my first TV set when I was 8 years old. So, I was always immersed in science and physics and electronics and so on. By the time I was 16, I invented a new way to get the magnesium out of seawater that we talked about that didn't employ the use of platinum. And I found myself at the International Science Fair in Indianapolis, where I met Wernher von Braun and all kinds of people. And interestingly enough, a number of doctors, because I went to Eli Lilly and then from there to University of Indiana, and saw and was introduced to doctors who were working at cancer research. I had brought my materials along. I had also been working in cancer research in Bradenton, Sarasota area, where I lived, where a lot of retired Army and Navy and so on, medical doctors, and they were all interested, very interested in cancer at the time. And my grandma died of it, and I was determined to kill cancer, and take it by the throat and kill it. And you have to understand that I wasn't worried about that I didn't have credentials or the training, because I'd already read the Encyclopedia Britannica by then. I had lots of interest in everything and plunged into cancer research, got connections, for example, to get germ-free mice. Even my mentor at Manatee High School was a retired Colonel Philip Doyle, had all these connections. So with all the International Science Fair attention and attention from the press and so on, I actually managed to, they had a laboratory set up. By the time I was 17, I was giving mice cancer. I wanted to get mice cancer so I could cure cancer. But actually what happened is that I crashed a very important seminar that was being held in St. Petersburg because I couldn't get there. My work was so advanced, I couldn't get anybody in the area to assess it properly. So I crashed this, and I met Dr. Harold Deal, the head of the American Cancer Societies, as the vice president of all the research. Also, Dr. Robert Robinson, Nobel Prize winner, and Dr. Harold Urey. They introduced me to Dr. George Moore, who's head of the Institute Roswell Park. I'm going as fast as I can here. And the upshot of it is that they were so impressed. They visited my high school, and they closed my lab down. It was so dangerous what I was working with. I was working with a fast-acting virus that could cause cancer, and it was triggered by cigarette smoke. That's very important because Dr. Harold Deal, Dr. George Moore, and Dr. Alden Ochsner, the three of them had been going around trying to tell people that smoking could cause cancer. Nobody was believing them. And now, the year after I brought this to everybody's attention, the Surgeon General came out and put this on cigarettes, danger that can cause cancer.
So what year was this, Judyth?
1961 is when I was doing this. In 62, the warnings came out about cancer could be caused by cigarette smoking. And also at the same time, they stopped high school students from getting involved into really advanced projects that used animals. I went through a lot of mice, and I've always felt badly about that, the suffering that they went through. All right, so here I am. I'm sent to Roswell Park. I'm given all kinds of advanced training. I learned how to handle the SV40 monkey virus, and even there, my name got in the paper and my picture and everything up in Buffalo, New York. Even though I was among, with 6 others that they chose. I'm talking about this because the newspapers then mentioned that when I was finished with these studies and I had a lot of scholarships and could go where I want, and I presented a paper, when I was still 18, I presented a paper about my studies in melanogenesis, in melanoma. And in the papers, we have the proof. It says there that I was required and asked to pursue studies in how to make cancer more deadly. That's very important. I was told that I was going to be assigned this while I was working in college and so on, and I was being funded for all of this. We know now that there were CIA connections galore, attached to this, and they even had me learning how to speak Russian and to reading Russian material because they thought the Russians were ahead in a lot of medical areas such as cancer research. So here I am studying Russian. I couldn't speak it very well because most of it was just to translate, papers. But the point is that I had this interest in Russia and started reading Russian poetry and so on. This is important because we'll be talking about Lee Oswald pretty soon. So here I am, and I've found a new way to get 2 things that were 2 big factors. One is I was able to work at Roswell Park with Dr. Moore on a very famous, it is now a famous formula. It's called the RMPI 1640. At that time, we were at RPMI 1600 about, so it still had some tweaking to go. This formula is still being used today as the best formula to grow cancer fastest. So you see where I was headed. Now, I thought all of this was, they told me, if we understand how to make cancer more powerful and deadly, that's how we can cure it. We can figure out, what to deprive it of, and so on. So I was fooled. I wasn't realizing I was being actually molded to be used as someone who could actually help to create a biological weapon. It's very important to understand that. Now, at that time, I was asked to go. This is 1963 now. I've had 2 years of training. I've been also, I love people, and I had a lot of boyfriends, and I even got athletic medals.
How old are you at this juncture?
18.
18.
And I was still 18 when I was invited to go to New Orleans and there to work with Dr. Mary Sherman. Mary Stell Sherman was famous in her areas for bone cancer and everything else. She was working on the same kind of area I was, rapidly galloping cancers. What's going on here? And she's still being quoted today for some of the work that she had done. She was the only female running a laboratory for Dr. Ochsner in New Orleans. Now remember, Dr. Ochsner, Dr. Moore, And Dr. Deal had been working on anti-cancer programs, about cigarette smoking and all that. So that triad of doctors, they had stuck with me because it was only 2 years later. And now I'm offered an early entry, can skip 2 years before going into Tulane, and I'm asked to come to New Orleans. I had problems with my parents, and I did not want to go home. I arrived in New Orleans 2 weeks early. These doctors, that Dr. Oxner, who wanted me to, he said, to work on this project with Dr. Sherman, was out of town. And so was Dr. Sherman. And all of a sudden, I found myself alone in New Orleans. And I'm used to being taken very good care of. I thought I was going to have steak dinner, and they were going to introduce me to all these doctors. Instead, I arrive, I get out of the bus, and the first thing I hear is a gunshot go. I try to walk to the YWCA where I was supposed to have a room reserved for me until I decided whether I wanted to be housed at Tulane or where, And the only room they had available, and I had very little money, was with 2 strippers, a Playboy bunny, and a waitress, all shoved into this small room. And here I am alone, and I am an asset, you see, in this project. This formula, this RPMI 1640, which was probably RPMI 1600 at that time. You have to understand that I was one of the few people in the world that knew about this formula, and that by bringing me to New Orleans, I would be able to help, again, grow cancer better and faster than anybody else could. Very few people knew about the formula that Dr. Moore was working on. Newspaper articles show you that I was working in his private laboratory with him at Roswell Park. So that, and working with other doctors, I was an expert also in handling things on a primitive level. Remember, when I talk about giving mice cancer in only 7 days, it had never been done before. And I did it in a laboratory with a dirt floor under a stadium. So you see, I had no concepts or preconceptions about how to do this, that, or the other. And I was able to work very rapidly because of that, pursuing my goal, to try and get these mice to have cancer so I could work on them to cure cancer. And I had many ideas about how to do that, and I still do. All right, here I am in New Orleans. I'm alone. I don't want my parents to know I'm coming because I'm planning to elope at the same time with his name is Robert Ellison Baker III. And he was working with his parents. He learned that I was going to be going to New Orleans. I said I wasn't coming back to the University of Florida. He said, then I'm going to come and marry you, And since he was turning his interest to geology, and they had a lot of universities there, he had only 1 semester left to get his degree in English. And we hadn't met because I love to write. So I was waiting for him to come and marry me at the same time, but I didn't want to tell him I was going to be staying and wouldn't go back with him to the University of Florida. I was afraid he wouldn't marry me. And I thought it was love, but my friends, it was sex. It was hormones. And my newly found independence, that I wasn't a Catholic anymore. I'd become an atheist. I'd wanted to become a nun. My parents literally kidnapped me out so that I couldn't. They were going to put the Sisters of St. Francis were going to put me through medical school. And I thought I couldn't have babies, so why get married? And I was going to devote my life to God and to man and to helping serve humankind forever. My parents said, "Are you nuts?" And they pulled me out. So unfortunately, we had many arguments, and I ended up, Senator Smathers got me a scholarship 3 months later so I could enter the University of Florida, even though it was late. I was months late by then to get in, but they, just like today, they can pull these strings and they can do what they want with you. And they wanted to make sure I continued going down this path. So I'm in New Orleans. I've come early because our university in Florida, University of Florida, got out early. Now, I had some special things that you need to understand. I hated Kennedy. Oh, I liked him in high school, but by the time I was at University of Florida, I hated him. I'd seen those tanks roll down. I saw how we didn't take over Cuba. I was with all my anti-Castro friends there in Florida. And by the way, I got primed for that because I was dating in high school the son of the finance minister of Castro's Cuba. He had to leave the country because his mom was an American. And Rufo Lopez Fresquet later left. It turned out he was CIA. So I had these contacts, And I knew a spy. There are many complications. You can find it all in the book, Me and Lee, that it's over 600 pages. Me and Lee, How I Came to Know, Love, and Lose Lee Harvey Oswald. So this is the background. I'm in New Orleans. My doctors are not there. I'm an asset. I'm loose cannon right now because guess who's taking me around to see the real world? They say things, honey, you don't drink, you don't smoke, you don't swear, and you don't know anything. And you're going to get married. You don't even know anything. Well, I did know some things by then. But the point is I saw more human flesh, I suppose, than I'd seen except on operating tables, in New Orleans in the most unusual positions. And
so all of this sort of fairly boring life that you've led up to this point, and you're still...
It wasn't boring. Life was never boring.
No, that's a little bit of English satire there. Yeah. But you're still not even out of your teens.
Oh no, I'm 19 by now. Actually, I'm still 18 when I reached New Orleans. I'm 19 by now. I turned when I got the invitation to go. I was still 18. I turned 19. Well, I'm going to turn 20. I'll just put it that way. I'll be turning 20.
Who was it that was taking you around New Orleans and adding to your education?
2 strippers and a Playboy bunny. She was going to Playboy bunny school there and everything. And I've gotten a letter where I described these people, that I was able to send one letter. Now, Robert's parents were anti-Catholic. They hated my Catholic parents. They met and hated each other. So we didn't want them to know that we were planning to elope. Robert said that he loved me. He's going to write every day. He didn't do it. I mean, he's supposed to come and he asked me to put an ad in the paper to show that I was there because he didn't want me calling because he's afraid his parents would see a long distance call and say, what's this from New Orleans about? He took a couple of weeks to persuade them to let him go to New Orleans because he had changed his mind about not being a writer, and they were delighted. They were afraid he'd starve to death. And he's going to become a geologist. They're all for it. But that took a couple of weeks to do. Meanwhile, I'm there by myself. And I'm thinking, we're going to get married. We're going to have a short, because my doctors are not coming back until about the second week in May. And I arrived here in April. And, when he comes, we'll have a nice little honeymoon. And then I'm going to tell him, I have to stay. You have to go back and finish your degree. I'm going to stay here. So that was a little sneaky of me, but I didn't want to lose him. Little did I know how this would turn out in the end. So anyway, here I am in New Orleans, and I'm going to send off this one letter he's allowing me to write, and it can't have my name on it. So he said, pretend that you're my friend, Raleigh Rourke. That's an R and then Rourke, okay? And so I put that with my general delivery address at the top of the letter. This is important. And it was going to be mailed to Robert A. Baker at Eglin Air Force Base, where his parents were building different, it wasn't barracks, they were nice houses they were building there for the military. So that's where they were getting their mail. Behind me is standing this interesting young man. Now remember, Lee Oswald was only 23. I'm 19. I'm angry because for days, my fiance says he's going to write every day. He loves me, and there's nothing. I turn my head around and I see this young man standing there. He doesn't have a wedding ring on his left hand, and I'm thinking, wait a minute, this is during the time of the sexual revolution. The only reason we wanted to even marry is so we could get birth control pills. We didn't believe in the piece of paper. We didn't believe in it. It's just what we had to have. Those birth control pills. I didn't want to get pregnant. So that was the situation. So I'm handing over this. I had a rolled up newspaper under my arm, and that had that. I said, when I came, I put an ad in the paper so he knew I would be there. And I put it in code. I couldn't put, Judy is waiting for you, Robert. Don't let your parents know. I didn't do that. I put Jario, and that J-A, that was for Judith Ann. And yo means I am Judith Ann, in Spanish. So I put Jario. I didn't know that was a cryptic code name that Lee Oswald had heard about in the CIA. Here it is. I'm using this very odd, unusual cryptic Jario, and he thinks, didn't I see that in the CIA? This is what he's thinking when he picks up this rolled up newspaper and hands it back to me. And I'm thinking, gee, I'd like to start a conversation with this guy. He's cute and he's not married. So I said back in Russian, because when I used Russian, people would say, what did you say? And we'd start a conversation. So I said, Karasha tovarish, like that. And he said, it's not wise to speak Russian in New Orleans. And he said it back to me in Russian. I couldn't believe it. He couldn't believe me. I couldn't believe him. I mean, you just don't find people speaking Russian on the streets during the time of the Cold War.
Well, this was the height of the Cold War, wasn't it? Because, I mean, this was Berlin Wall time. That's
right. And the last thing you want to do is be speaking Russian to anybody. I mean, that you could be under suspicion for doing it. And here I'd used Russian just because I thought nobody would ever know. And he'd say, what are you saying? And I could say, oh, I'm just pretending to be Russian, I couldn't believe it. So he picks this up, but on the other part, he had seen me hand over this, because we're at the general delivery. I'd handed over this envelope, and it said R. Rourke, and it said it was to Robert A. Baker. Later, he would tell me that he knew a Robert A. Baker at Eglin Air Force Base, who was an FBI agent. And the R. Rourke, my R looked like an A, and he knew Alexander Rourke, who was a CIA pilot. He thought I was transferring some information for Alex Rourke to Robert Baker. Now, you have to understand, then I'm talking to him, and I realize, he says, I'll walk you back to the Y. Then I see he's got a ring on his right hand. My grandma had a ring on her right hand. She was Hungarian. And I realized this man had been married in the USSR, and he was speaking Russian. So we started talking, and when I learned that he had come back with a Russian wife, he said he wasn't getting along with her, that he's planning to divorce her. But he said that right away. When I learned he'd come back, and I said I had all these contacts with a former spy, and whose name was Mickelson. And then with Tony Lopez Fresqueta, I'd learned a lot about spycraft and stuff from him. His father was with the CIA. Castro himself didn't realize it. I know I'm looking at a hero. This man could not have come back and be walking free and not arrested on our streets unless he was one of ours. He was a fake defector. You imagine how I felt to learn this. I mean, this is right away. I learned it because he thought he was talking to someone who had connections that I really didn't have. Why did he do that? Well, it turned out the night before he had visited David Ferry. Now, David Ferry is seen in the film JFK and so on. David Ferry was with the CIA and the FBI, and I have a whole book about him. It's called David Ferry, Mafia Pilot. Yes, and that book is over 500 pages. It's the only book ever written about David. I knew him personally, and he was murdered. In fact, everybody that I'm talking about in New Orleans ended up getting murdered. So because I don't know this young man, Lee Oswald, I don't know anything about him, and I've seen bad stuff already. I thought, well, I'm going to drop some names so he'll know I'm not alone here. I said, I'm going to be working with Dr. Mary Sherman. And that's when he said, well, for heaven's sakes. Well, he didn't use that exact word. But what he did say is, this is remarkable. That's what he actually said. This is remarkable. He said, we were talking about Mary Sherman last night, Dr. Sherman. I said, really? He said, yes, it's Dr. David Ferry is working with Dr. Mary Sherman on a cancer project. And he starts describing this project, and it's the same project I'm supposed to be working on. Only, you see, this was the secret side of the project. I was going to be on the other side. By the time the doctors got back, it was too late. I now know that Lee Oswald was sent to intercept me and to stop me from associating with these strippers and all these people, and they wanted me to drink and other things are going on. And it's like, you're young, go do this. We understand that now, but I didn't understand it at the time. But when he dropped the name of Mary Sherman, and I'm supposed to work with Mary Sherman, I thought, aha, now I'm going to meet Mary because she's coming back to town. They didn't say when. They weren't going to give me that information at the Oxnard Clinic because they had no information on me at that time. So he said, come on, you're going to meet David Ferry. By the time everybody realized when the doctors got back, it was too late. They put me on the secret side of this project to kill Castro. And they wanted to kill Castro. Dr. Oxnard was way anti-communist. He was flying every week to Washington, D.C. He was famous for his work in cancer research and was lung cancer specialist. Had given lung cancer to mice in only 7 days. They wanted to kill Castro with lung cancer. Nobody would be blamed. They realized that they had found ways to, and I knew how to do this myself. I understood the project because I'd been working on the periphery of it and didn't even know it. They were trying to make cancer more deadly so it could be injectable, and that they wanted to give it to Castro. And not that the doctors around him would have known this, but if you're giving an injection of penicillin to somebody, your doctor gets it out of the refrigerator, right? If that's got cancer cells in it instead of penicillin, do you see what I'm saying? But that's just a little aside. There are many ways that Ochsner, who had worked for many years with doctors in Cuba and trained them at Ochsner Clinic, and they even stayed at Brent House. That was especially for Central and South American and Cuban students. All of a sudden, they weren't allowed. Castro wouldn't let them come to the United States anymore. You had a lot of angry doctors and a lot of the sons of angry doctors who were cut off, and they were sent for training instead to the USSR. When they came back, they were on a salary, and instead of becoming rich, like so many American doctors do, they found themselves on a salary working with peasants. And I helped them, and a lot of them were very resentful that they had their everything cut off. So there was a pool of doctors and technicians willing to do what they could to kill Castro, and Ochsner knew them. So that's some of that background. Now, Mary Sherman was involved because she, just like David Vary, they loved Kennedy. Now, you're going to hear differently about everybody, and even in all the newspapers and of the time, and even in the film JFK, it shows David Vary as hating Kennedy and plotting to kill Kennedy. And indeed, even in my presence, he would talk to people and say, I hope somebody shoots Kennedy. Now, why was he doing this? Well, during the Bay of Pigs, he had been training. He was a wonderful pilot. He was fluent in 5 languages, spoken languages, knew Greek and Latin, and so on. He was a genius in many ways, and he had been working in cancer research just like I had, because his mother was dying of it. So she was dead by the time I met him. But the point is Mary Sherman knew him. They had met at Children's Crippled Hospital, and he had been bringing toys to the kids there, and she was the surgeon there. And so this is the background. I get involved with this group, and it turns out that Lee is there to pose eventually as pro-Castro, so that they make sure that spies, because Castro understood that New Orleans, that was a hotbed of danger for him. We had, at that time, David Vary and others were training insurgents to come against Castro. David Vary was telling everybody how much he hated Kennedy after the Bay of Pigs, because some of his people actually were killed there, people he'd worked with, young men. And one of them had been tortured, and another had been basically broiled to death in a metal bin along with some others. They opened it up and they were all dead in the hot sun. You know what I'm saying? It was horrible. And he just hated Kennedy because Kennedy took the blame. And remember, Vary was an Irish Catholic. He had even voted for this president. Now he's standing before a group of retired military officers. They've come from several states. They're having their very first meeting. David Vary is famous for his neat speeches and how smart he is, and his support of the military. And they have him as their keynote speaker for their very first meeting. He gets up there. It's right after the Bay of Pigs, and he says somebody is going to shoot Kennedy. You know, they're going to do it from behind a bush, and that's fine with him. They made him get off the stage. But right after that meeting was over, about half of those retired military officers came around him and said, do you know what we're doing in Texas? Do you know what we're trying to get done here? Do you know how much we hate Kennedy just like you? He said, we can use you. After all, you're a pilot. You fly all the time between New Orleans and Texas. And Dr. Ochsner is your friend, which was the truth at that time. And we have all these connections with the oil people, with Lyndon Johnson, with the CIA, FBI, and they hate Kennedy too. How would you like to help us, be our pilot? You can do a lot of stuff for us. So David Vary from that time on says he hates Kennedy, but it isn't long before he learns that Kennedy fires Allen Dulles, head of the CIA, forces him to retire, forces him out because they had done all of this and tried to force us to have actually World War III. If it hadn't been for Kennedy, we now know from the book by David Talbot called The Devil's Chessboard, Kennedy was the only one that stood between us and nuclear war. Even his own brother wanted to bomb Havana. And even Senator Smathers, who was Kennedy's best man at his wedding and a close friend, and who was my mentor. Senator Smathers was the one that got me into the University of Florida on a scholarship there. I was in close contact with this man. Here we find out Smathers had talked to Kennedy and said, look, let's do this. All we have to do is paint some of our planes and have Cuban insignia and go ahead and bomb our boys at Guantanamo Bay. We've got a big ship out there now. Let's just bomb it. We'll lose 400 or 500 boys, but then we can bomb Havana. That is Senator Smathers telling Kennedy. Kennedy smashed a dish. He was so angry about it. He's never going to do such a thing. So they couldn't get Kennedy, you see, to do a thing about Cuba.
This was about the time of Operation Northwoods as well, wasn't it?
Well, Northwoods, this is months before Northwoods. This is the first evidence that we have that Northwoods existed. Okay? So we have Smathers and all these people know. And they're, by the way, they are contaminating Kennedy. Smathers takes them to all these houses of ill repute. I mean, Kennedy was a playboy before anyway. But that man loved his country. You might even look at like Donald Trump. Even though he had everything he wanted to go and serve his country. So he was an outsider in that way, and they hated him. They really wanted to get rid of him. They think they've got someone in David Vary who can be a courier. He knows so many people. He's working all the time with anti-Castro people. He knows the mafia. He's working with the mafia. The mafia and the CIA were working together to try to kill Kennedy. And at the same time, they wanted to kill Castro. When I said to kill Kennedy, that's the way it was going to turn out if they couldn't kill Castro. That was the background for all of this, and that people don't understand that either one or the other, if they got rid of, that would have made everybody happy, because then if they had been able to kill Castro, they could have entered, had their puppets set up in Cuba, and by doing so, CIA would move in, the mafia would move in again, all your anti-Castro people would be happy. CIA would be diverted away from hating Kennedy to, taking over the island, getting their prestige back. We could go on and on. So by killing Castro, we felt like we might be helping to save Kennedy's life. Because David Vary now realizes that, when he saw that Kennedy actually fired Charles Cabell of the CIA, he's a general, and disgraced him and his family. General Cabell was thrown out by Kennedy. That's what David Vary realized, how brave Kennedy was, and it wasn't his fault, and secretly began to gather information to try to save his life. Now, that's what people don't know about David Vary, but I did, because I knew him very well, and because I worked with him constantly.
Okay, now we're starting to run, Judyth, we're starting to run a bit tight on time.
Okay. All right, so the background of this is, my final word, though, is that David Vary, in other words, was not who he seemed to be. And because of what he was showing us, Lee Oswald and I, we realized we were in great danger in the end there, trying to see if we can kill Castro, weaponizing cancer. But it turned out, really, that Lee Oswald was sent to Mexico City with a bioweapon, and they never intended it to get into Cuban hands. We should have realized it. They sent him down there so they could set him up to make him look like he was working with the KGB and assassins there to kill Kennedy. It's horrible. Lee Oswald penetrated these groups through David Vary. He wanted to save the president's life. When I said in 1999 that Lee Oswald wanted to save Kennedy, I mean, they said, oh, sure, we see his patsy. Come on, he would. But now we have Abraham Bolden, the Secret Service agent, has come out. And just as I said, Lee Oswald told me only 37 and a half hours before the assassination that he didn't think he was going to come out of this alive, but he had done everything he could to try to save Kennedy. And he said what did he tell you that his role was at that point? 3 weeks before. What?
What was his role? I mean, he was trying to save Kennedy, but how did he feel he was being set up?
Oh my God, that all started actually in July, when you have to read the book to get all the information, and we can't do it in 45 minutes. But the point that I'd like to get across is that Lee Oswald had so many connections with the mafia His uncle was mafia. The CIA and the mafia were working together to try to kill Castro. But mafia also wanted to kill Kennedy. And I mean, Kennedy was decimating them. Lee Oswald was a perfect bridge between the mafia and the CIA. He had been sent as a fake defector. He came back. He was under the control of James Jesus Angleton. Lee Oswald came back to the United States, so-called defector, on a State Department loan. You only give that to good citizens. I mean, it's just outrageous, the things that they put against him. This man said, I was a Marine. I was sent here to try to protect this project and make sure that any Castro's agents wouldn't find out about it. He's passing out pamphlets and all that. He's get involved because he knows the mafia, he knows the CIA, and he's got Judyth Vary giving him inside information. He does what he can, and they've got to get rid of him. They will shoot him dead only 47 hours after his arrest, and he's buried the same day as Kennedy. And I loved him. We fell in love. I can't tell you what it's like to see someone that you love shot to death, and then on top of that, hear horrible things about him that were not true. This is it's taken years, but finally people are listening to me. I've been able to bring forth witnesses. I have a whole slew of them. In fact, we have new witnesses that are going to be at the JFK Assassination Conference being held November 18, 19, and 20 in Dallas. And please, people, come if you can on November 22nd on Tuesday, because we're going to be running the moment of silence. It's been held every year, but we've been able to take it over now. And we wanted to make sure it's not connected to any conference, that it becomes something that the American people can look forward to every year. And at that time, they were going to hear the truth. Lee Oswald was a patsy, just like he said. And even the Warren Commission said that they had no motive for him. We have Marina Oswald, his wife, saying, well, how do you know he loved Kennedy? And she says this, and it's on record. When little Patrick Kennedy died, and the baby was born premature, he had hyaline lung disease, Lee Oswald brought home the paper, opened it up, and he read this, and he began to weep. He loved Kennedy so much that even knowing that what Kennedy was going through, he cried right in front of his Russian wife. This is the man they had to get rid of. And I survived only because I'd objected to using prisoners. They were testing the material we'd been working on. I came late into the project, but I sped it up. I knew how to speed it up, and that's why they brought me in. And they sent me back to Florida. By then, I had married this man so I could get birth control pills, okay? And he abandoned me. I mean, Lee Oswald didn't have a very good marriage. He got his wife pregnant again so that when he had divorced her, she wouldn't be deported and he'd be able to keep his children in the United States. And as for me, I only married Mr. Baker so I could get birth control pills because the man abandoned me. And it's all in the book. Wow. He only showed up every once in a while. So here I am, I am sent back to Florida. And instead of being J. Baker or J. Vary, Judyth Vary said, keep your name out of the papers. I didn't go to my own sister's wedding. I didn't go to my own grandparents' funerals, nothing. I stayed silent because Lee said, stay alive. Tell my little girls that I was a good guy.
Well, that's a remarkable story. Truly, truly remarkable. And, well, thank you so much for, coming out into the public domain and sharing it. And let's just remind people of the conference, because this is the conference that you're organising later this month, the JFK Assassination Conference in Dallas.
In case anybody's missing, 35 speakers there, new witnesses. We have 6 new witnesses. Kennedy was murdered basically by a cabal that was run with the knowledge and cooperation of Lyndon Johnson, CIA, and of course the FBI. It sounds like a whole list and litany. How could all these people be involved? But there's so many were involved at such a level that if you tried to blame one of them, they could blame the other. They say, so the FBI couldn't blame the CIA couldn't blame Lyndon Johnson. Everybody had their finger in it.
Oh, and as I think we saw in the Warren Commission. But this is your book, Me and Lee.
Yeah. Yes.
Me and Lee, How I Came to Know, Love and Lose Lee Harvey Oswald.
And it's 608 pages. I see it says 672. It's 608 pages. However, the book is filled You see, I thought we were going to be trying to kill Castro, so I saved all kinds of documents. And that's important because, I mean, I'm talking about even check stubs for our cover companies. Do we have any time left?
Listen, we've got about 4 minutes left. What I'd just like to get you, because you made the observation about, a desire back in 1960 to start World War III. Well, there are many of us here in the UK who believe that if Hillary Clinton is gifted the White House, which of course George Soros has said she will be, then, that basically, as of tomorrow, if she is gifted the White House, we will be on a countdown to World War III.
We are in a dreadful situation where I've discovered many lies that were written about and perpetrated about Trump. Trump has been crucified, absolutely crucified. Even some of the things that look like he said that were so terrible. He's a joker and he would use light language. The man, look at his family. What we have on the other side is essential corruption. My life will be in more danger than ever before. All of you are going to be in much more danger because there's no end to their accumulation of wealth and corruption. And I say it at the risk of knowing that this woman will be president if she possibly can do it, and she will do anything to be president. And actually, the people propping her up. Because if she dies, it doesn't matter. The next man will be a puppet. I don't think the United States is going to have another chance at honest government after tomorrow.
Sadly, that is the case. And one of the concerns, as you rightly say, is that I discovered recently that Google tried to hide Clinton body count. They were trying to remove it, but we would encourage people to search the Clinton body count, and I actually discovered that even the British online media, in fact, this is from the Daily Mail in the UK. It's actually an article from a few years ago, but Google tries to bury the Clinton body count. The search engine accused of hiding negative stories during Hillary's campaign. And of course, the body count.
The corruption is incredible.
Yeah. They are they believe themselves to be totally above the law. But she is quite clearly the most manipulable president because there are so many skeletons in the Clinton closet.
The key to who she is the Clinton Foundation. They've tried everything they can. Of course, recently came out, you may not know, but even Hillary Clinton's, the Clinton's daughter even was, her wedding was funded. If you go to the actual amount of money that was actually given to charity, well, just put it this way. There's not one instance where I see any true kindness, only words by the Clintons. And this began all the way back. We have Senator Boggs, who was criticizing, he was on the Warren Commission, criticizing things. We have young Clinton driving him to an airport. He gets on a plane and he is destroyed. He is murdered. So, this is way back. They've been in it even all the way back to just after the Kennedy assassination.
Well, they've been a long time being groomed. And so, Judyth, let me just give Brian the opportunity. You've been sitting there very quietly.
It's been an absolutely fascinating story that you've given us on the subject of Hillary Clinton, that little expression that was reported here. She said, couldn't we drone somebody, which was an implication to kill somebody who was giving her problems. So I can imagine her as president of the United States. Anybody gives her a problem.
She'll have everything then.
Drone her.
She has sold out every possible way. Had her husband up for sale. He would give a speech. Somebody who'd never had him give a speech before paid $200,000 or $250,000, and a week later, their company gets a real good bonus from the State Department, to do some contract over and over again. And she'll stand there and talk about Bolivia or Ecuador and how she cares, or Haiti. And it turns out most of it went in their pockets. They're very rich and powerful. And Trump has been maligned viciously. I couldn't even get, when I was in Sweden, I couldn't get anybody to listen to me about the real Donald Trump, who could never have been as successful as he is if he were actually the monster he's been portrayed as,
Well, right now he's the biggest threat. But I'm just going to share this with you because this is how the British public are being groomed in readiness for. If I can just find my my right slide here, maybe I haven't got it now. But oh yes, I have. Here we go. This was in today's Daily Mail, and you can see here how the British public are being groomed to expect a Clinton presidency, because what you see here is that in terms of the Electoral College, Clinton has 266 confirmed votes, Trump has 207, and of course only 270 is required of the Electoral College votes to become president. And although there's 65 still in the offing, the likelihood is that, as George Soros said, Hillary will be gifted the White House. And then really all I can say is, God help us all. And I'm just I'm not going to have time to explore this, but this is from the Daily Mail again, 10 years ago. The Mail Online, by the way, is a separate editorial team to the printed version. And the Mail Online actually does run some truly remarkable articles from time to time. And this is from 2006. Hitler and Stalin were possessed by the devil, says the Vatican exorcist. Well,
it's just this kind of thing, though, that delegitimizes all of our efforts to get the strong facts out there. Because when we appeal to this part of the section of the population, we offend many who don't concur or believe in this kind of thing. We divide us. We need to look at those things that unite us, that all of us can agree upon. For example, there's no doubt that the Clintons were all boohooing when they left the White House. They had nothing. How have they been able, a former president, and she's Secretary of State, how is it they are now worth, hundreds of millions of dollars? And on top of that, by the way, they stole furniture from the White House and were forced to give it back. And they steal right and left.
Well, because they absolutely work on the principle that they are above the law. They believe they have, obviously, protection at the absolute highest level in the global corporatocracy. So, we're
things happen that you just don't even see behind the scenes. I mean, Trump has been caught in stalled elevators. He's had to climb out of them. He's had been blocked getting to speeches, and he's had to crawl over barriers, and cross highways to get to where he's supposed to go. You wouldn't believe all the impediments that have been placed against this man that he never has complained about.
Yeah, but it was never going to be a fair fight. And I think that, again, to quote George Soros, Donald Trump will win the popular vote, but Hillary will be resident in the White House as of January next year. Judyth, it's been an absolute pleasure to speak with you. I'm sure we'll continue the discussion. I know there's a lot more ground to cover. Just to quickly, refresh people's minds on your books. We have Me and Lee, How I Came to Know, Love and Lose Lee Harvey Oswald, and your more recent book, Judyth Vary, Mafia Pilot, Participant in Anti-Castro Bioweapon Plot, Friend of Lee Harvey Oswald, and Keys to JFK Assassination.
They are, that's a long, I didn't do that. It's a long title my publisher did. But the basic way to get the books, you can get it through Amazon, you can go to Trine Day Books, or you can actually write to me and get autograph copy, and that would be judythvarybaker at gmail.com. That's JUDYTH, V as in Victor, ARY, Baker, all one word, judythvarybaker at gmail.com. And I can send you personally autographed. I don't make very much money on. The point is that when people have something like that, you tend to hold on to it.
All right, what we'll do, Judyth, we'll put that contact address in the text below this YouTube video. And I'm sure we'll have the opportunity to speak before. If not, I look forward to meeting you in person in Ireland in February. Wonderful. Thanks very much indeed. And Brian, thank you very much for
it's been fascinating. Tonight. Thank you very much, Judyth.
Okay, and final word, any thoughts on the White House?
No, I'm just going to wake up and see. Well, I shall see the result when it comes.
Well, I must confess, I was surprised when I woke up on the morning of June 23rd on the Brexit referendum. So who knows? I may be surprised again. Thank you so much. Thank you, Judyth. An absolute pleasure, and thank you for joining us. And we'll be back next week. And next week, the title of the program is fuck the poor, because that's exactly what's going on in the UK right now. And what we will be showing is the total lack of social conscience that is being applied by the government of this country. So thanks very much. See you next week.